Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Harper, and I'm honored to be your keynote for the 2021 California ADR Conference. First things first, I'd like to send a huge thank you to Dr. Matheny and the entire conference committee. One, for just putting together an amazing conference. This has been one of the more intuitive and really efficient platforms that I've seen, and the ability to pivot is nothing short of fantastic. And so I want to give some kudos to Dr. Matheny and the entire ADR conference committee for what they managed to put together. I know you're probably sitting, if you're sitting by yourself or you're sitting with other folks, feel free to give them a round of applause because what they've done has been nothing short of phenomenal. And another thing that I want to thank them for is asking me to be a keynote presenter. I have been coming to this conference, for a number of years now. And one thing that I can say is that this conference has some of the strongest keynote presenters going. And, none more appropriate than yesterday's with Nina Meyerding. She was phenomenal as usual. And I am just honored. It's an honor and a privilege to be added to that list. And now a message to the viewership. First, I hope that you're all safe and healthy. As we've seen, making it to 2021 has been no small feat. And I continue to hope for the health and well-being for yourselves as well as the students. You serve a very vulnerable part of the population. And I'd like to think that 2020 was a real eye-opener for people to appreciate the work that you all do as administrators, educators, service providers, and parents. So whether it was through Google Classroom, Zoom, or even in person, I'd like to take this moment to acknowledge and thank everyone that is watching this keynote. So if you're sitting by yourself or you're sitting with some other folks, feel free to give yourselves a round of applause. Give yourself a pat on the back and give yourself a hug because we've been through a lot. So, with that, I hope that the newfound appreciation for all the work that you do extends well beyond a global pandemic. And I think it goes without saying that, I wish that we were all here in person together. And I very much look forward to the day that we'll be able to. So with that in mind, I understand that some of you are not familiar with me or know who I am, and that's fine. That's fine. That's okay. I want to take this time out to tell you a little bit about my journey, how I got here, what I do, and how what informs all the things that I provide. So what I want to do is start at the top. So I am a ADR consultant. I am an ADR consultant, and a lot of things that go into that is about facilitating IEP meetings, mediating resolution sessions. I do trainings, and I also do conflict coaching, whether that's for executives or administrators, teachers, even families. I do a lot of that as well, and I enjoy every second of it. It's an opportunity for me to marry my two loves, that being mediation and education, and so I do that fairly often. When I'm not, being an ADR person in special education, I am a private mediator that practices employment and workplace mediation. That's something else that I do, and I enjoy it very much. Also, when I'm not mediating and I'm not consulting, I am a professor. I teach cross-cultural dispute resolution at the University of Southern California's Law School. I will say that law students are some of the more interesting people I've ever met in my life. And I say that with all the love in my heart. But the class is actually pretty fun. It's pretty cool. Essentially what I do is I talk with all of them about 3 separate units. The first is about self-discovery. You have to understand what culture is. You have to understand how you interact with culture, what your culture is, and then we go into the subjective thinking that we tend to fall into from time to time, where we talk about our implicit biases and we talk about our triggers and all of those things. I feel like that makes you a more informed person when you understand yourself. That's the first step. The second unit then goes into the different cross-cultural communication patterns that we enter and encounter on a day-to-day basis. And really the crux of that whole unit is around the idea that Cross-cultural communication is rife with conflict. The potential for conflict is there every single time. And the reason why is because everyone wants to put their best foot forward. But the issue is the way that people put their best foot forward can be in complete opposition to each other. So one person's idea of showing respect could be the other person's idea of absolute disrespect. So what we need to do is we need to remain curious, we need to ask questions, and we need to have a greater level of understanding and empathy for the people that are in front of us. And so that's the second unit. Then in the third unit, we bring all of those things together, our own knowledge of ourselves, our knowledge of other different types of patterns of communication, and then we talk about it from the negotiation process within larger systems. And by larger systems, I'm referring to capitalism, socialism, patriarchy, religion, all of these, macro level systems that we all encounter and we all interact within every single day. And so that's the entire class, and I hope that everyone learns a lot from it. I enjoy teaching it, but that's what I do at USC. And then on top of that, for about a 3-year period, I was a president of the largest association of mediators in the state of California. Very proud to say that. And it was absolutely a trip. It was a journey. And something that someone told me a while ago really rung true. And that was that they found, and I've also found, that educators make the best leaders. And the reason why is because the job description stays the same. And that job description is, you want to take your people and put them in the best position possible to succeed. And you try to strive for that every day. And that's what I tried to do during my time as president, and I greatly enjoyed it. It was an honor and a privilege to do so. But all of the things that I just mentioned, they're all great. I appreciate, the opportunity that I've had to do all of those things. But really, it's the last two things that inform everything that I've done since. So at another life, I was a 7th grade algebra teacher. And I will say that 7th graders and law students are very, very similar. The reason why I can teach law students is because I taught 7th graders. And the reason why that is because they both project as though they know everything. But really, they're just trying to figure life out while in the midst of a bunch of changes. So from that standpoint, it's not as hard as it seems dealing with law students because of my time in middle school. So if you'll afford me the time, a quick second, I want to tell you just my favorite story from my time teaching 7th graders. First day of school, I had this one student, and she came to my desk and said, just so we're clear, I don't do math and my family doesn't do math. And so I'm going to sit in the back corner of this room. Don't call on me, and I won't cause a ruckus in your class. If we do that, we'll be okay. She told me this on the first day of school. And I said, okay, well, you're closing yourself off a little early, but have a seat and we'll see what happens. And so I go about teaching. The first quiz comes around. She earns a B on the quiz and comes to my desk and takes the B and says, what did you do? And so I told her that, all I did was grade the quiz. You got the B. And she went back and was very skeptical, but she went back, sat down, and she kept listening and she kept picking things up to the point where she was actually helping out the other students in the class. And so, she ended up getting A's and B's and she just kept on going. And she's a civil engineer now. And so, this is not my victory story by any stretch of the imagination. It's all hers. But it was really, really cool to see the light bulb come on. And that's one thing I really miss and appreciate about my time teaching algebra, because that's the dividing line from a confidence standpoint between a person that loves math for the rest of their life and the person, we all know that person that goes to the restaurant and doesn't want to see the bill. Just tell me how much I owe. I don't want to do any division. I don't want to do any subtraction. Just tell me how much, just tell me the number. We all may or may not know someone like that. And we love them too. But that was my time as a 7th grade algebra teacher. And then finally, I got my start as a paraeducator, a one-on-one paraeducator in a special day class, in an elementary school, and most of the students were nonverbal, but I loved every minute of my time doing that. I still think about the kids to this day, and two things that I gained from my time as a one-on-one paraeducator. One thing I got was patience, and the other thing that I got was perspective. So, from a patient standpoint, I learned that it's really about, that incremental development, that incremental progress, and being able to and being willing to celebrate even the smallest achievements. That's where I learned, my time in SEC is where I learned how to do that. And then perspective, I think that, you learn perspective on a completely different level when you're in that particular setting. One of the things that I neglected to mention in this list is between my 7th grade algebra teaching time and my presidency at SCMA, I went corporate for a few years. And I was always characterized as one of the more relaxed people in the office. And the reason why was because I felt like I had the right perspective. One of the things that I noticed in those offices is that the stakes that everyone was putting on the different deals, on the different numbers, on the different negotiations, all of those things were by and large artificial, because I knew what real stakes were. I know what real stakes are. And those real stakes are the times that I was working with those kids on their goals, because it's not about numbers, it's about impacting and helping students become the best that they can be. And when you're dealing with someone's life and you're dealing with someone's development, the stakes don't get much higher than that. I recognized it at that time. I recognize it to this day. And that's really what informs a lot of the work that I do up to now. And so that's a little bit of my story. That's my journey in special education and mediation. And again, it's just an honor and a privilege to be able to put all of those things together and be a mediator in special education. And so again, it's an honor to be here and to speak with all of you. And so what we're going to talk about essentially are contentious moments. So I want to really kind of go into essentially what it is that we're talking about today. How we manage contentious moments has more to do with the context than the actual conversation. Okay, it has more to do with the context than the actual conversation. When we really think about and break down how we feel or how we felt in those contentious moments, we realize that more often than not, it wasn't about the moment itself. It was something else, right? That happened to flare up or happened to trigger something, a reaction in the moment. Okay, so there's a world-renowned mediator, attorney, and psychologist and counselor by the name of Bill Eddy. Bill Eddy has a phrase that's famous. He said, "The issue is not the issue." Well, to make a play on that phrase, I'd like to say in this moment that the moment isn't really about the moment. There's something else there, and if we can handle that, then I think we'll be in a good place. So we're going to discuss the external and internal context to these contentious moments and how to manage them when they arise. So I want you to walk away from this with some awareness of how these moments affect us and how to mitigate them in the moment as well as moving forward. That's where mindfulness comes into play. And so the way we're going to do this is I'm going to go over some terms and some definitions to kind of set the table, at which point we're then going to go into some, kind of some introspective activities. And then I'm going to give you 3 tips on how to, mitigate these moments so that you can, in essence, take the power back. All right. So with that in mind, allow me to tell you a story in regards to a case that I was working on a couple of years back. And so I was facilitating an IEP meeting, and you had a number of people there, per usual. You had the parents, you had the program specialist, you had the psychologist, you had all of the people that would be in a, standard IEP meeting, right? And so during the IEP meeting, the district was making a recommendation in regards to particular services. And the family was not quite seeing eye to eye with the district on those particular those particular recommendations. And so one of the parents started asking questions to the program specialist, trying to gain some extra, insight into that particular decision. And one of the things that happened was the questions came quicker and quicker, more quicker than the previous question. And, some could see that the tension in the room was starting to rise a little bit, to the point where the program specialist, he had to get up and he said, we need to take a break. We need to take a 5-minute break, and stepped out. And, which was fine. Everyone kind of took a breath and took their break. And I walked in, I checked in with everyone. And after the 5-minute break, we all came back in, resumed the IEP meeting, and everyone walked away happy, everyone. And so what I like to do is I like to break things down with everyone after the IEP meeting. And I met with the program specialist afterwards, and I asked him, hey, tell me a little bit about what happened there. And what he said was, what he said was really, really telling. And it's kind of the basis for what we're going to talk about today. What he said is that it wasn't so much the questions that the family was asking. He said that the way that they were asking those questions reminded him of how his mom, confronted him when he was growing up, and all of the fear and the tension that came along with that when he was growing up, and it all just came flooding back in that moment. And so that in and of itself was, that was really, in essence, an example of the moment not really being about the moment. It was about something else that had happened long ago, and it really affected him, and it brought all of those things back. Those questions brought all of those things back at that time, and he had to react. So what I'd like to do is, now whether you've had that same response or not, whether you've had that same moment or not, a good number of us have felt the heat in those particular meetings, or just in general. I know that I have. And so I want to take that story and turn it into something of a case study on how to take the power back in those moments. All right. So with that in mind, that brings us to our very first definition, which is conflict. Now, in order to get to the root of things, let's break down what caused the moment in the first place. Okay. Now, what happened here was that the tone and the tenor of the discussion in my story changed because of a conflict. And that's where we go into our very first term. Conflict is defined as a disagreement between two or more parties that result in a perceived threat to a person's needs, their interests, and or their concerns. All right, a disagreement between two or more parties that results in a perceived threat to one's needs, interests, and or concerns. Now, if you're the underlining type, if you're the highlighting type, the key word here is perceived. Okay. And the reason why perceived is, important here, it's because conflict does not lie in objective reality. Conflict lies in our expectations for, with, and towards, and of the other person. All right. Conflict lies in our expectations. When people live up or live down to our expectations, we're fine. But when people don't live up or don't live down to our expectations, then we potentially perceive a threat to our needs, our interests, and or our concerns. All right. So let's break conflict down a little bit more. So let's talk about those needs. Those needs can be substantial, right? Things of substance. It's cold, I need a jacket, or I'm hungry, I want, a steak dinner. They could be procedural, right? I don't feel comfortable if things don't go in a particular order. We may or may not know people like that, but that's why we have agendas in meetings. That's so that people can have an understanding of, hey, I know where we are right now, but this is where we're going, so I can prepare for it. That's a procedural need. All right. All of these things are very valid. All of these things are legit. And then you have the psychological need. And that's a whole other conversation. And I think I have a breakout on that. But the psychological needs that we have, I don't feel like I'm a part of the team when I don't get CC'd on that email. right? And that's a need that speaks to affiliation, being a part of the group, right? I don't feel like I'm a part of the team when I don't get invited to happy hour, right? Those are psychological needs that people have in order to really thrive. All right, so those are those are an example of some of the needs that people have in conflict, or that result in conflict when those needs are not being met. Another thing to understand about conflict is that it is inevitable. Conflict is inevitable. It's going to happen. All right, that's why I like to use the phrase conflict management. Okay, because preventing conflict is not a possibility. I'm going to give you an illustration for that. So, everyone should, or everyone probably has or had at one point, a Facebook account. Facebook has been through some things. Let's be clear. But let's talk about Facebook as a concept. It is an absolutely amazing app where essentially you have created your own social media environment, your own bubble, if you will. And within that bubble, you have what we thought was full autonomy. You have control over who comes in. You have control over what information comes up, and everyone's happy, right? So, you choose the people you want, and we'll talk about that more in a second. You choose, whatever activities, hobbies, TV shows, what have you. You can, quote, like that page, and only that information comes up. And it's gotten to the point where you can go shopping on other websites for things, and advertisements for those items will show up on your Facebook feed. I always thought that was a little weird, but these are things that you're interested in, so it's all good, it all goes. So let's break down why we add the people that we add on Facebook, why we have Facebook friends, right? And there are some family members that we wouldn't friend on Facebook. I think a lot of us have experienced that. But why do we add the people that we add? Well, we grew up together. That's one reason. We worship at the same place. We have the same hobbies. We grew up in the same town. We have a bunch of mutual friends, right? And so you just add people on because, oh, well, if you know this person, then I'm sure we're cool. And those are the reasons why we generally add people onto our Facebook account. So, we've created this environment with people that we know or know enough, and, that we're happy with, and that we're fine with, and that we feel comfortable sharing different bits of our lives on a public platform, right? And it's great. And we expect that we're going to get complete harmony. We're going to get, affirmation. We're going to get encouragement, all of these things. So what happens when that political or religious rant that goes counter to everything you believe, what happens when that pops up? Well, there's a few reactions that we all have. There's usually one of three. We either mute that person, we block that person, or the third option, which is my personal favorite, we engage, have a back and forth, and then mute or block that person, right? But never mind that. Let's go back to the actual thought process, because our minds speak very fast. And here's what your mind is saying in so many words. When that piece of information pops up, when that statement pops up, when that rant pops up that runs counter to everything you believe, your mind in one way or another says something along the lines of, that's not what I brought you on here for. I brought you on here because I thought we viewed things the same way. I thought that I was creating an environment, a community where we could all get along and we all are able to, work through and talk through issues because we see them in the same way. You have to leave. You're threatening my environment. That's what our minds are saying in so many words in those moments. But that in and of itself is an illustration of conflict. Even in an environment where you have 100% control over who comes in, what information pops up, it'll still arrive. That's conflict, right? And so how much more likely is conflict in the real world where you don't have control over the next person that walks in through the door, let alone what they have to say, right? So that's the illustration of the inevitability of conflict. Now, there's an other side to that coin, in that it is, able to be planned for. One of the things that, really was great about this conference, yes, particularly yesterday, was there were talks about system design. And system design is really important for conflict management. You're making a plan to encounter and be able to mitigate the conflict when it arrives, because it will, right? And so that's a great thing. That is a gift that we're able to, process and devise different plans and structures for the mitigation and the management of conflict in the moment when it arises. So that's good. And conflict in and of itself is a neutral term. It can be a positive situation, or it can turn into a negative situation, depending on how we confront it, how we interact with it. Okay. So we have the power in that sense, and that's a great thing. And so I want us to be able to remember that. I want us to not be afraid of conflict, right? I want us to understand that, hey, it's a part of life. It's living, right? Without conflict, we would miss out on so many different advancements in our society if we didn't have conflict, if we didn't see a difference in one person's thinking versus another person's. They come together, they decide to ask questions, they decide to remain curious, talk things out, and boom, now we have synergy and we created something amazing. All right. So that is conflict. But let's talk about conflict in the confines of this particular industry. Now, when we look at special ed specifically, this is an industry that's rife with conflict, or the potential for conflict, and there are a few reasons why. So when we talk about, the continuing relationship, this is a long-term relationship. Now, in special education, generally, services start at age 3 and they age out at 22. So by my count, that's 19 years. That's longer than a lot of marriages nowadays. And so in a long-term relationship, one of the things that we have to be mindful of is that conflict is going to come up, right? It's going to come up. And, in a long-term relationship, it's the way that we address those conflicts that are really in play here, that really carry the day. And so that's why when I'm facilitating IEP meetings, when I'm speaking with families, when I'm speaking with district staff, I tell them that, when we talk about IEP meetings, it's not just that one meeting. It's not just about getting through this one meeting. This is about the next 5 IEP meetings. This is about the next 10 IEP meetings, because family isn't going anywhere and the district isn't moving anytime soon. So we have to figure out a way to work together. Okay. Then we have the context of the conflict, right? And so the context, an example of that is the student in the 1st grade or is the student in the 11th grade. And based on that alone, there could be differing, just tenors to the conflict itself, to the disagreement. And so that's absolutely an issue, and that's absolutely a factor when it comes to conflicts in special education. Another is that there are multiple players and their personalities, their individual personalities. So when we talk about the case carrier, the administrator, the service provider, the gen ed teacher, there's a number of personalities in play, and any mark in the variables can change the tone of a conversation. And that's the human element of special education. It's beautiful. And when the team is working together and synergy is happening, there's not much things that are better than that, right? We're now a cohesive team that is working towards the betterment of the student, right? And then, obviously the last point is that it is emotional. And this is really the root of in a lot of cases. While we try to put a positive spin on the IEP meetings and focusing on strengths, which I absolutely support, by the way, we sometimes forget that to the family, the IEP meeting is at minimum a yearly reminder that their child is not exactly what they were hoping for when they found out that they were pregnant. And, and what makes it, and what can make it even tougher is just the nature of the meeting itself. When we talk through, when we look through different charts and graphs and numbers and observations and real scientific data that backs up the idea that, oh yeah, no, this is not what you were hoping for. So you never know where a person is in the grieving process, in the grief process. And even that is an assumption that the grief process is linear. Sometimes you move back and forth. There's a lot that goes into that. And so when when we have conflicts, again, those contentious moments may not necessarily be about the moments themselves, right? And obviously this extends well beyond just IEP meetings. This is life, this is living, this is just the interactions that we have on a day-to-day basis. So it's important that we remember those things in our conflicts or in our contentious moments. Speaking of emotions, this is where I want to talk with you about what emotions are and how we manage them and how we interact with them. So emotions are defined as a complex psychological state that involves three components. All right, there's three components to emotions, which is a complex psychological state. One is the subjective experience. So when we go back to the case study, the story that I mentioned earlier, the subjective experience in relation to the program specialist at that moment. He was getting the questions, and while I was hearing the questions, I was hearing the exact same questions as the program specialist was, but he heard them in a completely different way, in a very subjective way, right? And it was very subjective to him and his experiences. And based on that subjective experience, he had a physiological response, right? So the subjective experience is you see it. The physiological response is you feel it, all right? So by feeling it, he felt as though he was tensing up. He felt the heat, and he felt like all of those memories started rushing back. And that's where the physiological response started to come from. He started getting fidgety, and that's when the behavioral or the expressive response came into play, all right? So the subjective experience, you see it. The physiological response, you feel it. And then the behavioral or expressive response, you act on it. And what was his action in that moment? His action was to get up, ask for a break, and walk outside. So those are the emotions that he was feeling in that moment. He saw it, he felt it, then he acted. All right. So when we look at all of those things, these are things that we all experience. Emotions are a human trait, right? One of the things that I always heard early on was that, hey, emotions, especially in negotiation, emotions are to be tucked away. Emotions are to be, completely done away with. If you have emotions, then you're weak. That's not the case. If you have emotions, it means that you're human, right? That's what we need to understand. And so when we talk about emotions, again, it is in a subjective experience. You see it, a physiological response, you feel it, and then the behavioral or expressive response, which is you act. So let's talk about the characteristics of emotions. They are short-lived, right? For example, back in the story that we used here, the 5-minute break. Once that 5-minute break ended, took a few deep breaths, came back in, and he was back at stasis, if you will, and was able to really just continue with the meeting perfectly fine. All right. So these emotions are short-lived. They're also fluid. Okay. So someone can go from disappointment to anger all the way back to stasis, right? So they're fluid. They can absolutely move around. They're likely to have a definite and definable cause. So when I spoke with the program specialist after the meeting, he told me the exact specific cause of the emotions that he was experiencing in that moment. So again, the emotions are likely to have a definite and definable cause. And the last characteristic about emotions is that it is powerful. Emotions are very powerful, and they can be very hard to handle. One of the things that people say, and to a certain extent, I think it's true, particularly depending on the type of emotion, is that there's a reason why people say you don't want to make life-changing decisions when you are experiencing particular emotions, particularly strong emotions. And why is that? And that's because you're making a long-term decision based off of a short-term, short-lived feeling that you have. Okay, so that's something that you want to be mindful of when we're talking about emotions, when we're talking about how they come up in those moments. Okay, and so another thing that we want to talk about is that emotions are contagious. much like confidence, emotions are contagious. And the reason for that is because our brains are wired for group survival. And this is one of those moments where I really wish we were all, sitting in person at, the big auditorium in the ballroom, as it were. Also because I'm a walker and talker naturally, and it is killing me to just sit in this seat and just be able to talk, but never mind that. Our brains are wired for group survival. So to go back to the story, when the program specialist got up, asked for a break, everybody stopped. And they said, okay. But he gained all of the attention in that moment. The reason for that is because our brains are wired for group survival. If we were all sitting in the ballroom together right now, and I want you to envision the ballroom that we would all be sitting in at this moment. Now, I'm standing at the stage, I'm talking, I'm doing my thing. We're all sitting in the round tables, as it were, and someone in the back corner screams, gets up, and runs out of the ballroom. What do you think is going to happen? I have a particularly good idea. I know what I'm doing. I'm doing my best to continue, right? But myself and everyone in that ballroom is going to look up, see where the noise is coming from, see where that person is running out of, and then gauge where they are in relation to that person that just got up and ran, to be able to really assess how much time they have to make a move if something really were happening in that moment that was dangerous to everyone, because our brains are wired for group survival. And so another example is when facial expressions of fear and danger are displayed, people absolutely feel that, especially on Zoom. So that is absolutely that's absolutely something that is really important to remember. When we see distress, when we see that things are not well, we can absolutely perceive that, and that can change the way that we interact with each other. So it's very, very important that we remember that. And then the last thing is that in the absence of a power structure, the most emotional person can and will likely dominate group attention. Okay, and that's why it's important to have structure. It's important to have agendas. It's important to have some systems in place, because if the most emotional person is dominating the group attention, then that means that we're going all over the place. We originally might have a plan, and then all of a sudden, boom, it just goes in a different direction. And so there's ways that we can work around that and talk through those things. I think that's very, very important. So now that we've talked about, that particular moment in that IEP meeting, when we talk about, just what happened with the program specialist and, what he was perceiving, that subjective experience, that physiological response, and then the behavioral or, expressive response, all of those things happen in the midst of that conflict, right? And so now we're going to talk about mindfulness and really think about what that all means. So mindfulness is defined as the mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment while calmly acknowledging and accepting one's feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations. I'll say it one more time. It's the mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment while calmly acknowledging and accepting one's feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations. So what does that look like in the confines of the story and the confines of the case study that we're working with? So we take a look at that program specialist. If that program specialist was practicing mindfulness, what would that look like? He would be focusing his awareness on the present moment, right? The conversation that's going on in that moment, at that point, while calmly acknowledging and accepting the feelings, the thoughts, and the bodily sensations. So when we go back to the definition of emotions, the three components, right? The subjective experience, notice that has not changed. He's still seeing and perceiving the questions in a way that is reminding him of something else. However, when practicing mindfulness, steps 2 and steps 3 absolutely change, okay? And so step 2 would be the physiological response. Calmly acknowledging the feelings and the thoughts will allow that physiological response to potentially change, right? And at the very least, be able to acknowledge and recognize them in the moment. And then the bodily sensations, him feeling the heat, him wanting to get up and walk out, that potentially might change, right? So that second and third component might change because he was practicing mindfulness in that moment. Okay, so he's able to calmly acknowledge and accept the thoughts and the feelings and the bodily sensations. And in contentious moments, what we tend to feel is more indicative it's indicative of more than what's in front of us. Again, this goes back to, just all the things that we talk through and all the things that we experience in our lives leading up to that moment. And in those contentious moments, those memories can come flooding in, and that can affect us. Now, again, I have to say that, this is really about, now the story that I have is about, a program specialist who perceived some questions in a particular way and was able to, and was not able to, really contain it in the moment and had to, call for a break and make a move. But this is something that we all experience in one way, shape, or form or another. And it's really about us being able to get to a place where we can, whether it's a conversation with a loved one, whether it's a conversation with a coworker, whether it's a conversation with the entire IEP team, these are conversations and these are moments where we can actually take the power back by really calmly acknowledging, what we're seeing, how it's making us feel, so that the expressive response can be a little bit different. All right. And maybe even the physiological response as well. So at this time, here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to ask you a series of reflection questions. I want you to be able to look back and really think through, yourself and your background and your journey and all the things that you've experienced. And so when I ask you these questions, I want you to close your eyes. I want you all to close your eyes while I ask these series of questions. And I'm going to give you about 20 to 30 seconds to really think through how you're answering these questions. Again, if you're sitting by yourself or you're sitting with somebody else, just get into space, close your eyes, and try to think through the questions that I'm going to ask. All right, we'll start right now. Think about growing up. How were emotions addressed? Do you remember a time as a child when you got sad, worried, or angry? Do you remember how the adults reacted? How have the people in your life growing up shown their emotions? Think about times when you have been involved in conflict. What emotions have you experienced in these situations? How comfortable are you with talking about your emotions? Are some emotions easier to talk about than others? How comfortable are you with talking with others about their emotions? Okay, you can open your eyes. Thank you very much for participating in this particular activity. It can be heavy, and it can bring up a lot of things, and that's okay, because this is where the work can start, with taking the power back in these moments, right? Understanding where they're coming from and how they affected us in the moment to be able to work through, us being able to, mitigate them when we reach those contentious moments. So, I want to share with you a little bit about my experience going through asking myself these questions. And growing up, I was taught to repress emotions, because I was taught that it makes you weak, in essence. But after a lot of introspection and a lot of conversation, I understood why I was taught that. But I also realized the harmful effects in the long term. And obviously it was my father that really, tried to teach me to be tough and macho and showing your emotions make you weak, they make you look weak, and all of those things. And I believed it, when I was a kid, but over time I grew to learn differently. And the polar opposite, actually. It makes you very strong to be able to show your emotions and to really, feel the things that you feel and let people know. But I also got to a place where I understood why my father showed me and taught me that specific idea. Just being an African-American man that was born in the 1940s in the South, there's a lot of reasons why he taught me, to view emotions the way that he did. And I appreciated that. But, it's not good in the long term for a relationship. So that's something that I think is really, really important. And so now I want to talk with you about, some of the things that you can do in order to kind of mitigate those situations and take the power back. The first thing that I would say when talking about how to be present in that moment is to name it to tame it, right? In order to take the power back, we need to be able to name what's happening in the moment. Now, this absolutely takes practice. And mindfulness is a practice in and of itself, because no one ever really fully arrives. But when you can practice naming the emotion, naming what you're feeling in that moment, you have the ability to remove kind of the taboo nature of the feelings, which can then take the intimidation away. And the more you're able to identify and call it out for what it is, the less power that it has. All right. The second thing that I would say is divide and conquer. Divide and conquer. Now, typically, when we think through our emotions and the cause for our physiological responses, typically it's more than one thing that's attached to that moment or that particular feeling. And that's part of what makes it large and intimidating to confront. So instead, I want you to take the time to break down and name each particular moment that is the cause of why you're feeling the way you're feeling. Being able to do that will enable you to process that emotion with greater ease. All right. Now, it won't be easy, but it will be less difficult when it's done in smaller parts. All right. So again, it's important to be able to work through, these feelings, because anger is a secondary emotion. Anger is, preceded by disappointment, fear, a number of different things, a number of different emotions that can then lead to anger. And so if we just deal with the anger itself, that's only half of the story, if that, maybe even a third. So to be able to divide and conquer is a skill that's very, very important to possess. And then the third is, committing to conversation. Now, this is where the real work can begin. I want you to think back to the answers that you gave in that introspective portion of my time. And I want you to commit to speaking about them with someone, okay? Now, perhaps you don't have the tools at this time to process through some of the memories and the emotions that came with it, but someone else can help you with that, right? And one of the other reasons why these emotions and memories are intimidating is because we attach shame to them. And in essence, we want to keep them hidden. But bringing them out is another way of taking the power back, of saying that, this particular emotion, this particular memory doesn't have a hold on me. And when I find myself in a situation where I'm having a conversation and that particular memory comes back up and I'm having that subjective experience, I can, alter my physiological response. I can alter my behavioral response because I've done the work. I've had the conversations. I've been able to kind of destigmatize those particular memories and those emotions. And now I'm able to see them for what they are. And because I can see them for what they are, I can manage myself a lot better and be more present for that person that I'm speaking with. And so those are the three things that I would absolutely recommend that you think through, when you talk about naming entertainment, dividing and conquering, and then committing to a conversation. All right. So, as I come to a close, I hope that you're able to look back at some of those moments and be able to break them down like we were able to do today with the in essence, the case study that I wanted to share with you. So from learning about conflict, to learning about emotions, to learning about mindfulness, we now have more tools to, in essence, do that inner work that can make us all better at what we all do best. And that's serving that vulnerable part of the population that need us. So thank you all for the time, and I hope to see you again. Have a good day.
Hello, everyone. I want to let you know that Mr. Harper is having a live Q&A at 1 p.m. this afternoon in the networking lounge. So that will be a great time to ask him any questions you may have. Thank you.